The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, folks. Hello and welcome to the Monday edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording here from Right to Offend Media Studios. And joining me for our first interview of the year is Steve Stratton, friend of the show, who was actually my first guest of the year last year in 2024. And it was a great year for the show last year. So, Steve, you're my good luck token, as it were. So, thanks for joining me once again, and happy Publication Day.
Well, thank you very much. That's coming up on January 14th, and it's another exciting day, right? Any pub day is a great, launch day is a great day.
Yes, and my birthday is actually that Friday as well. So,
action-packed week. There we go.
Yeah, very action-packed week. I'll be turning 30 on Friday, so big one. So
nice.
So anyway, well, Steve, I wanted to start off asking you. I've read your first three books, the Lance Bearwolf series, and as a new fan of the series, I have to say I really like how you created Lance Bearwolf to be a Native American. He has some of that old school Native American war technique, but he's also a special forces modern military man as well. So I'm just curious. I'm not sure if you've explained this in the books or on your website, but how did you come up with Lance Bearwolf as a character, and what inspired him?
Yeah, so I started writing the very first book, Shadow Tier, in 2019, like in the break between, Thanksgiving and New Year's, when I was a federal contractor at the time. And so government really is shutting down. And so lots of extra time to write. But I didn't have a primary character in mind at the time. And I started looking around at all these people I admired. Of course, Mark Greaney and, Brad Taylor, Andrews and Wilson, Stephen Conley. And so lots of great characters. But I was thinking maybe I want somebody different. I was influenced by Frank Herbert in my early career, or my early readings, like of Dune and everything Dune, but also some different people who, I navigated towards stories about martial artists, ninja, things like this. And so I wanted some of that different kind of thinking. I wanted somebody who could be in the real world, so to speak, not stuck in a matrix, in the real world, but also have some of that older school teaching and mentality. So, some of my friends joke that I'm a boomer nerd that likes new age, likes stuff going on today. So I sort of cross over. And so it just dawned on me that, hey, I don't see anybody writing from a Native American perspective. Not that I'm trying to steep people into all the origins of the Crow tribe or that kind of thing.
Right.
But Louis L'Amour did that one book called Last of Breed about the Air Force pilot Native American who was shot down over Siberia and had to work his way back to freedom. And that was really impressive and made a great impression. So that's where I came up with Lance. It wasn't until the third book is that novella where I really dive into who Lance is, A Warrior's Path. And in this fourth book here, we have a lot of fun. I wanted to stay in one country, not six. Because the previous book, you remember, Shadow Sanction, I was
Yeah.
in like the Crow reservation. We were in Afghanistan, Marseille, France, New York, and I thought, okay, I've done the Rainbow Six kind of thing with all over the world. Maybe I should focus on just one spot. So I picked Cuba because I just wanted to, I needed a warm spot to relate to at the time.
Yeah, yeah. Props to you. You did do the Rainbow Six thing, but you also did it like in half the page length of Clancy. So
My goodness, I before writing the book, I re-listened to Rainbow Six, and I wasn't paying attention. And one day I opened it up to listen to it some more, and I realized I still had 30 hours to go.
yeah.
It's like a 35, 40-hour audiobook, much less, how I've got it over my shoulder somewhere. It's back on the other side there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Rainbow Six because I'm actually listening to Without Remorse, which is that's the first, kind of Rainbow Six book, if you want to, put it in that series. And I started that, I think, back in October. And I'm still like, I'm just now making it to the halfway point, and in the meantime, I'm sitting here like thinking like, how do people read or listen to all the George R. R. Martin Game of Thrones novels when those are like equal in length, and there are 6 of them. I'm starting to understand why he hasn't published anything in 15 years. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Just in the short time that I've been writing, and really, I started in 2019, but I was just writing. I didn't know what I was writing at the time. But in the 4 years or the 5 years since 2020, and people, agents and publishers and people, it's like we've gone from the 120. It's okay to go to 150K words if you're Mark Greaney or you're a name person, or Patterson or somebody like that. But the books keep getting smaller, right? A couple of years ago it was 100K, then it was 90. Now people are looking for 80K books just so that people can buy and move on instead of
yeah.
making a commitment.
Well, and the other thing too, I think as well with audiobooks becoming so prevalent too, it's a lot less. I don't want to say it's less work for audiobook narrators, but certainly as far as like length goes, it certainly helps them. And by the way, so I read the first book in your series, Shadow Sanction, but I actually listened to David Temple's one for the second one, and he did a fantastic job.
He was so gracious. He did a little bit of that sound editing and added some things in, which I thought was really cool, and
Yeah,
got me all set up. I had no idea about audiobooks and all the figures, you can do things nice and easily for a lot of the platforms, but when it comes to Audible, they've got all these restrictions on, bandwidth and clipping
yeah.
and blah blah blah.
I have a guy who narrates my novella series, and yeah, he does all that, and then I just it's a royalty split deal for my books, which is, some narrators, they like you to pay up front, but others, they want a royalty share. So I find I wish all audiobook narrators were straightforward, but it's definitely, it's a process for sure.
Yeah, but if they're good enough to if they've got a great voice, They do a great job for you, and then they can do the engineering to put it all together, right? That's really nice to have somebody who can give you the complete package and you upload the file like I did maybe through Findaway Voices or whoever, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, Audible, even for like, because a lot of people don't know this, but this podcast also gets, distributed for Audible, and iTunes and Spotify, pretty much all do the same thing. But like for Amazon, there's like extra stuff that you have to do for, even podcasts. It's a little odd, but anyway, so speaking of novellas, you've written 3 novels, but then you also wrote the novella. And what's funny is I actually talked to Terrence McCauley around the time he did his novella with Silverback Novellas. How'd you get involved in that group, and what was it like for you writing a novella as opposed to a full-length novel?
Well, I got involved with Silverback through my association with James Apton and Best Thrillers Design. I forget.
Best thriller books?
Best Thriller Books, yes. And then he has a company where he does a lot of social media and stuff like that. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so I was involved with him there, and he offered me a chance to invest in the company, which was fun. It was interesting having Terrence do the first one because actually, having been in the Secret Service, I had pretty good idea of what went on, what didn't go on in Chicago, and then what actually went on for 10 additional trips leading up to Dallas and in
Really?
1963. And I've actually written a short story about Dallas and about how the Secret Service was in this rut of doing the same thing over and over and over. We're bringing the president in, flying him in, motorcading all over the place, at great risk with the open top limousine and things like that. And yeah, so I wrote a story, a very different kind of story about Dallas, but being involved with Terrence, and then also knowing Chris Albanese, who's, much more recently retired, so to speak. He's still working, but retired from the Secret Service.
Right.
It was a fun thing to see him put together that story and then talk about the realities of what happens on the ground when there's an actual presidential movement and things like that.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I know a lot of people who work in Washington in politics, but my friends always joke with me that I'm the guy who knows all the Secret Service agents because I know you, I know CE a little bit, I know John Guarnieri, and I met Dan Bongino a long time ago. Those are all, Secret Service people from across different administrations. And
Yes.
so it's always interesting hearing everyone's perspective on, the Secret Service and really the presidency from that point of view, too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a definitely an interesting perspective on what's going on in Washington when you're right up next to it. Not
Yeah.
technically in it, but right up next to it all day long kind of things.
Have you ever considered like writing a story around the Secret Service, or has Eric Bishop cornered that territory with the Body Man?
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Eric does a great job for somebody who's not, he went
Yeah.
to the FBI Academy, but and he certainly knows to talk to people, do his research and things like that. Yeah, I actually have written now 4 short stories that I'm thinking about adding 4 more to do an anthology, but they're all Secret Service related. And I'll say that because my series is called The Order of the Red Coral. Red coral back in medieval days was used to ward off assassins. People would wear red coral
Right.
to ward off assassins. So that's the underlayment of an international organization that actually helps push and get the Secret Service started up into protection and presidential protection.
Interesting.
I've got a story. I've got a story way back in 1700s in Portugal. That's sort of the origin story. And right now, then my next story is Dallas in November of '63, Florida in May when the Queen comes to knight Schwarzkopf after the Gulf War, and then 2 years later when ex-President Bush was former President Bush was supposed to go to Kuwait to celebrate the beating up on Iraq and things like that. But there are actual Secret Service stories in there, protective kind of scenarios. Even in 1700s, I've got a group of guys that are trying to protect the King of Portugal.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the Secret Service, they didn't start, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't actually start protecting the president until Kennedy, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a bit before that, but when it was funny when the Secret Service when Treasury said, "Okay, Secret Service, you need to start protecting the president," they assigned 2 agents to the White House, and
Right.
I forget the date, but it was quite a while ago, and then eventually over time, one of the presidents, was there a presidential? I forget if it was an assassination attempt, but then it started to ramp up, and of course, then by the Eisenhower administration, it was a full up unit and things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting because, Dallas, we just had the anniversary of that at the end of last year, and then also, with this past year, we had, not one but two, assassination attempts against, President Trump, and I know that he's certainly a controversial figure, but I don't think any elected official should be targeted. What is your perspective? Because you were there when Reagan, when Hinckley tried to assassinate
Well,
him.
I had just left. So I was there. I got to White House when I was a communicator for the Army, right as before Nixon resigned. So I was there for Ford and Carter mostly, and then I left just before President Reagan was shot.
Wow.
But I'd gone in and out of that door at the hotel there many a time, that same exact door. Being low guy on the totem pole as far as rank, seniority, that kind of thing, my harping that we're committing the cardinal sin of doing the same thing over and over and over and over. That it was easy for somebody even mentally deranged Hinckley to know where to be, where to stand, to get
Yeah.
a good shot off, right? So, or shots off, um, and in reality, that is exactly the same kind of mentality that put President Kennedy in harm's way. The story that Terrence wrote was an actual visit that didn't happen, but the advance
Yeah.
team went out. And that's why I say, if you research that time in history, there's about 10 trips during the late summer into the fall where Kennedy was going out and trying to reunite America and doing the same. The advance teams were doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And so, was that a factor? I believe so. It just was made for, even back in those days, it made for easy understanding of what the movement profile might look like and other things. So even if they're
Yeah.
keeping it, close hold, things like that. So yeah, I've written these 4 stories. I've got the next one I'm thinking about doing was there was an attempt on Golda Meir by Black September in New York City back in the 70s, I think it was. So yeah, thinking of and starting to play around with like 5,000 to 6,000 word short stories is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I did a crime fiction anthology myself at the end of last year, and yeah, I for one, I try and write every day. I have larger like novella and novel projects, but I also like writing short stories just because there's something about, I guess, you can you can spend a month or more on just one chapter of a novel. And even though you're getting stuff done, it doesn't always feel like you're getting stuff done because you're rewriting. But like I find with short stories, that you still have to put effort into them, but they're not as intensive and tedious for
What
those, I
surprised
find.
me, Sam, what surprised me about the short story process is I completely forgot. It's short, right? You got a start and you got an ending, and you put a little action in between. That one of the short stories I was writing, I got stuck in the middle. And I'm
Yeah.
like, God dang it. There's a middle in a short story too. It might only be 1,000 words long, but there's still a middle. And so, yeah, I had to like set it down and do something else. And at any one time, I'll have three different things going on just because
Yeah.
it helps me. I can transition, but it also helps me with new ideas, new thoughts, take a break, look at something differently when I come back to it.
Yeah, and then I mean, in the case of the Lance Bearwolf novella you wrote, I did you write that as its own separate story, or did you write that with the intention of, hey, this is going to tie in to stuff in other books?
I wanted it to tie in. So people have been asking to learn more about Lance, how he started, where he came from, all that kind of stuff. So I wrote that with that in
Yeah.
mind. But I got so excited about writing that story, I was like almost at 50,000 words before I thought maybe I should stop and back up because this is supposed to be a novella, not another novel. And so yeah, I was able to tie it into, as you saw, into book one, I think pretty well. Hopefully, it didn't get too tedious in the middle where Lance was going through training and learning about himself and things like that. But yeah, that was fun. It was something to do because I was like trying to figure out what to do for the fourth book, which Caribbean Harvest, coming out on January 14th, is that what I call the fourth book. It's the fourth book in the series. Um, in the novella, which was the third book I wrote, should actually be read that first if you're going to
Yeah.
jump into the series, and then you can then following the series works a little better. So
Yeah, but I mean, that's why the term prequel also, exists. Like, I even went back and fleshed out some details of my main character, John Ryder's story, because I don't know about you, but like, for me personally, I started out writing the character, in one way, and then as I fleshed out more and more, you kind of, I guess in my case, you learn more about the character that you create yourself, and new ideas come to you, as things um, evolve.
100%. I knew Lance Bearwolf so much better after doing two books that I was able to go back and then tie it in and bring stuff that I'd hinted at or
Yeah,
mentioned here and there forward. So bring it forward in more depth. Didn't detract from the other books, but adds value to it because yeah, the I mean, my first character profile for Lance Bearwolf was like 2 pages long, very basic.
yeah,
And now I've got a character profile that's like 5 pages long, 200 questions. What would Lance do? This, that, the other thing. Did the same for Ellie Parker, his now wife, and some other folks. So I've never writers and teachers talk about building that Bible, right? The series Bible. And I've never done that. I've done the part about the characters, so I get to know the characters well, and I can be consistent in writing those characters. I haven't done the rest of the Bible. I still have to go back and look up what did I say here? Didn't I mention this here?
yeah.
That kind of stuff.
I mean, there are entire softwares for that, like Scrivener. I've used Scrivener before, but like honestly, I kind of keep like a running notes page on my iPhone, and that works just as good as
Yeah.
anything for character Bible. The other thing that's weird with some of those character Bible is some authors say that like you should have that ready to go right when you start writing, and I'm kind of like, well, when you first start writing, especially, if you're a first-time author like we all once were, you don't necessarily know how, if the book is going to be successful, if there's any interest, or if you're even going to want to continue to write, after that first book. So,
Yeah, is that investment worth your time, or should you be learning the craft, right?
right.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. It I did that 2-page character thing just to keep people straight, but I was doing that in my second and third edit kind of thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing that right off the bat. But yeah, the novella was a lot of fun. The short stories have been a lot of fun. They were a great break, and yeah, I've got all kinds of options before me about another short story, maybe a Lance short story, story for Ellie herself, and then the book after this one, which would be the main, like the fifth or potentially sixth Shadow Tier book, would be the president tells Lance he needs to stop the poisoning of America, stop the fentanyl. So that'd be next on the list.
Yeah, so that's the other interesting thing is the books don't necessarily match up concurrent to our current time. I know that the first one takes place in like in the 90s, and then I
Late 90s.
believe yeah, and then your second book takes place in the early 2000s. So are you eventually going to bring Lance into the present timeline, so to speak, or
Yeah. I'm working in 4 to 6 year chunks to get him up to speed. So,
yeah,
it's funny you mentioned that because writing a book set in 1998, it was when I was still operating as a Green Beret and stuff, and down in South America. And even then, even with that experience, I had to go back and make sure that, like, I didn't slip a brand new SIG pistol in there that didn't exist back then, stuff
yeah.
like that. So yeah, getting up to present day I think is a good idea.
What so in regards to your career as a Green Beret, how much has that influenced the character of Lance as well as far as fighting the drug war? I would imagine quite a lot. Obviously last time you were here you shared the story about how your mother was a victim of the cartels, and my condolences to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely been there's I have great respect for people who are able to pass selection and become part of a team. If you go on to bigger and better things, whether it's working with the Intel community or end up in Delta, CAG, some other, special task force, good on you. But there's a mindset, of being able to listen very well and tell stories so that you can get things done, right? The idea for Green Berets is to work through a partner country
Right.
to help get things done or to stabilize the region or whatever. And in special forces, an E5 weapons sergeant would, in a certain scenario, be responsible for 250, men and women fighters, like in a guerrilla kind of organization, things like that. So there's a lot of maturity, but also that ability to adapt and fit into a culture and things like that. And so that does inform how I write Lance. Morgan is on the other hand is a bit more of a freewheeling, rules are for somebody else kind of guy.
Yeah, he's the
Lance
maverick.
Lance doesn't mind banging up against the guardrail, sort of like, or taking somebody out in hockey kind of thing to score a goal. But yeah, so it that has informed my experience, makes it easier for me to build on Lance. I've got a new series that will come out in the fall with Winding Road Stories called Codename Snowman, and that's completely different. I don't have as I built that story out, I had nothing to go on from a personal experience standpoint. And so I had to investigate, research, talk to people. I mean, it's still set in essentially the intelligence community, but it was not where I was operating most of the time. So interesting, the difference in my sort of secondary, don't have to think about it too much to write Lance as a Green Beret and operator, that kind of thing, against the cartels versus this other story.
Yeah. Yeah, talk a little bit about the Project Snow Answers, because I believe last year you announced that on social media, and I know that you self-publish the Lance Bearwolf series now, but if I'm not mistaken, you actually got picked up by an indie press for this other series.
Right,
Correct?
right. My first book deal was with Force Poseidon, right
Yeah.
alongside Eric Bishop and the Body Man. And unfortunately, that press went under, and so I started self-publishing the Lance Bearwolf side. But then I actually went to Thriller Fest. I pitched the concept. I got to 6 people. I got 6 requests for information, 2 partials, 4 full manuscript requests, and then didn't hear anything. And happened to be talking to Michael Dolan, and Michael was like, we're thinking about doing a thriller, vein within what we do here, Winding Road Stories. Send me the manuscript. And so we ended up connecting, collaborating. We've edited the first 10 chapters and looking to get going again here in the new year on that project, because I've already written a second book based on Janet Winter and her merry band of interesting people. So,
Yeah. What's it like, we're doing an indie press versus, collaborating with, I guess, a publishing group? That's something that people are always curious about.
well,
So,
so I have not been picked up by Simon and Schuster or, Atria, Mystery
yeah,
Bus, blah, blah, blah. But the number one thing is that, it's all about engagement. I mean, I guess there are still people who would like to just write, not have to do social media, not have to come on a podcast like yours. But I think if you didn't hit it like Brad Thor with Lions of Lucerne, if you didn't hit it right out of the gate, then you're going to have to work to build your readership list, your readers, your IG, your Facebook, things like that. And
yeah,
so it's been a interesting learning experience, just like the learning experience of doing the audiobook. And so I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning new things. Not everything has to be tech. Sometimes it's just the business of the business, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So I think it's pretty similar. I don't have David the Bus, doing my promotions for me like he does for Jack Carr or Brad Thor, things like that. So I ended up my social media, my marketing campaign work hasn't really changed much since I got quote into the business,
right,
such as it is, other than like when Force Poseidon went out of business at the end of last year. I had to spend a couple weeks and dive into Amazon so I could learn how to put out second edition books and own my IP again and
yeah,
move forward. But there's so many great resources, and I take advantage of Kindlepreneur, the Outliers Writers Conference and group of people, part of an ITW critique group that really has helped me grow. And it's got great people like Jack Stewart is in it, Tracy Abramson, who's got like on book 50, very well-known authors and things that help me grow. So
yeah.
it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's very similar. I've been in the podcasting game for, basically since podcasting first became a thing in the mid 2000s. And what's interesting for me is, like, I've been writing stories forever, but it wasn't until I got out of college that I was like, okay, I might want to pursue this thing more seriously. And there are so many parallels I've noticed between like podcasting and writing in terms of, you know, basically like, you know, I've always done self-promotion for podcasting, and anyone who thinks that, you know, writing is going to be any easier as far as self-promotion, it's not. And you know, even me, like I come from the older, I guess, generation of social media where it was just Facebook and Twitter, but now you have like Instagram and TikTok and all these other avenues to promote books. And I'm like, well, how do you promote text on things like, you know, Instagram? And it's definitely, that's been wild to learn. Um,
Yeah, well, it turns out I did. So as you probably remember, Google put out this a decade ago, said, you know, there's four types of marketing you need to do. One is get to know me.
right.
One is here's what I'm doing. Here's what you should be interested in. Here's the third one is, you know, now I'm going to tell you where to go. And the fourth one is, okay, it's time to buy, that kind of thing. And so it's more or less a standard marketing campaign. You always have to be growing your awareness. When I was in a defense contracting business and building software for the defense community and the intelligence community, one time we did an ad on the Washington Metro, right? Trains, the underground trains and stuff like that. We knew
Mm-hmm.
we weren't going to get any new contracts or probably get any product buys out of it. But when you've got, you know, millions of people daily on the Metro, the equivalent of the New York subway, you're going to get more people will have seen your name. Will they remember it? Maybe not, you know, and so you're just continually trying to build that funnel of people who might be interested in the type of books you read. And recently I was doing some testing and campaigns and advertising with Pim van Offeren, who does the amazing book trailers that I have. He's out of the Netherlands. Monologue Digital is his company. And we found that Instagram was interesting, but the real market for interest in my books is actually Facebook. And of course, we could see the dynamics, the analytics, I should say, of age groups and things like that. And what do you know? The retiree group is the biggest buyer interested group of my product, whether it's that trailer or books or things like that. And so, with a little bit of insight and all these tools, whether you do Amazon ads, Instagram, or Facebook, they all have the analytics built in. So, based on your using them, you can start to target groups. And I had on Facebook, was it somewhere 20 and 30,000 impressions, people looking. And then, of course, now there's sort of there's a funneling effect. And so then the number of people that actually stayed on and watched like the full trailer and stuff like that, let's say 20,000 opened it, looked at it, and 14,000 watched the trailer. You know, 7,000 did this, another 1,000 did that, and it funnels down, hence the funnel. And so I ended up with, you know, almost 2,000 more people interested enough to take action on that trailer and do something to find out more about me.
Yeah, that's always interesting. I mean, my technique is I just try and like I pretty much tend to bombard all the socials more or less with the same post. But what's interesting for me is the podcast always does better on Twitter, or I guess it's called X now, whatever they're calling it these days. But then Instagram is always where my book sales tend to, you know, do the best as far as connection and whatnot, which is interesting because on Instagram posts you don't necessarily, you can't share links on Instagram as easily, but people on Instagram find their way, you know, from Instagram to you know, to your Amazon page.
Yeah, and I saw good growth in Instagram. It was
Yeah.
like sort of stuck in the 800 follower kind of range, and now I'm well over 1,000. The like you say, the Facebook and using the Bitly little link those kind of things inside the video and stuff like that. Yeah, it makes a difference. And in case I did an Amazon ad and I spent, I don't know, I spent $25 and I sold one $12 book. So my ROI was a little upside down, but there was the positive side was so many more people got to know me or got to
Yeah.
see me, right? So, and it is a numbers game because we just can't walk around and you can walk around and stuff your book in at different bookstores. I'm not sure they like it a lot because when somebody goes to buy it, it's not in their catalog, but it is part of becoming an author, especially an indie author, becoming a self-published author. You need to start investigating these kinds of subjects we're talking about, and there's lots of community, lots of people that will help you, or find somebody that can do it for you, that you could pay to do that, so you can continue to write, give them content, things like that.
Yeah, word of mouth too, I think really helps as well. By word of mouth, I also mean like online connection. It's interesting because um, I'm actually writing a character who's kind of a spin-off right now. I'm doing like a neo-Western character who's a Green Beret who also hunts the cartels, but he's on the Texas border. And what's interesting is I've been using AI art to kind of, promote that a bit. And I posted some AI art last year, and interestingly enough, I ran into, a couple people from the thriller community who I hadn't heard of at the time, but they were connected to you. One of whom is Luke Gozich, who runs the Men's Adventure Fiction podcast. And, you know, I hadn't spent any money to really promote any of my work, but like just because of a few well-placed hashtags, we found each other. And so it's always interesting how, sometimes certain posts can, hit that audience that you're looking for without even, really trying.
Yeah,
So
and when you've got a podcast, or authors will get together and cross share posts and
yeah.
do advertisements with each other and things like that. And so, yeah, once again, the different parts of the communities, whether it's Crave Books or all kinds of these different tools they can use to help you build your audience and/or connect with other authors who are trying to do similar things like that. In the indie side, you really, that's where the value of networking, just like an old school business or whatever you need to be doing, we're doing before you started writing, it applies here too.
Yeah, and then, the other thing I've found very helpful with the indie author community is also, it's a great way to like share ideas and, concepts for, characters and books and, will this work or will it not work? Or, hey, I really like that character. You might want to do a story or something with that character and focus more on, this individual,
Yeah.
as opposed to the person who, you thought would be, your main, uh, grab. So
Yeah, it's really, well, it certainly helps to be open to communication, criticism, alternative ideas. Just because people have opinions doesn't mean you have to take it whatever. You want to internalize it and see if it works for you.
yeah,
But
sure.
but right, it is really easy for me as a retiree to just sort of go hermit mode and just keep writing and have fun. And I come out, get some fresh coffee. My wife's cooking something, go work out. And I'll just be in hermit mode and I won't talk to anybody else in my family other than my wife, or anybody in the community. But when you get out and you network in this community, there are people who will help you. When I was writing one of the Secret Service short stories, I talked to CE, about what's it look like today, read a couple more books and exposés on what's going on, not going on the service, things like that. Make sure I'm using relevant data. Communities the best.
Does it I'm not really sure how to ask this question. I guess are you do you feel like the Secret Service has changed in a lot of ways since you were in there, or is it more? I guess are you more surprised by the changes, or are things more similar than you might expect them
I am
to be?
surprised by the deterioration of the Secret Service. What's the best way to put it? Let me say it a different way. The Secret Service is does not have a good reputation as a place to work.
Right.
They are having a hiring problem. Number one thing, and you did not solicit this, but I'm going to let you know that I think the Secret Service should give up some of their investigative mission and focus on protection.
I agree with that, but I didn't want to, put that
You don't
in,
want
in
to
your
you don't want
mouth.
to salt the pond there. The Yeah, because there's a whole bunch of other agencies that do. Secret Service comes originally out of Treasury before it became part of Homeland. So there's a bunch of people that do investigations, very similar kinds of investigations. Why the Secret Service is designated as the lead agency to investigate anytime somebody goes rapping on the .gov door. CISA, the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, they're the technical nerds about the whole subject. From a law enforcement perspective, it's still the Secret Service. It's got to
Right.
do the investigation about somebody hacking through .gov, things like that. So, and Commerce has people. Everybody's got cyber people, and so there's so much duplication. A great thing for Vivek and Elon to get after.
Yeah.
But you could cut back on the Secret Service range of missions and focus on protection, because people don't realize, but they're always assigning agents to whatever prince is coming from Arabia and into New York. They're assigning, certain, and it just doesn't have to be like the king of England, but was the queen or the pope or things like that. It doesn't have to be big events. There's a lot of things going on, and one of the things I was told was like where the New Jersey office had 60 agents in it, it's now got 20 some. Still got the same caseload.
Yeah.
Still has to support the protective mission, and so take a look at that. Oftentimes in the government, right, you don't want to give up assigned roles, because assigned roles are people, and people is budget. And budget means that I get to be a higher grade SES or a GS-15 or whatever. So there's a tendency not to want to give up mission or, job, because that part of your budget will go away. But if you can't prosecute those missions, those responsibilities in a decent way. And get me, I've been through campaign years. I understand campaign years, and there are stress on everybody. I mean, you are grabbing people from all over the place. What it used to be in Treasury, and now and we saw that in Pennsylvania with Trump. There was relatively few Secret Service agents there at the site, right? If you
Yeah.
count, just counting the close protection folks, the cat officers, the counter assault officers, cat team guys and gals, they're up there doing their thing. But there was several breakdowns there. There's no doubt in my mind
Yeah.
that they had a good plan. The plan was approved by the lead agent on the advance team. It had to also be approved by the lead agent who's bringing Trump into that plan, right?
Yeah.
But then if the execution breaks down and somebody can climb a roof and be hanging out and walking around and taking shots, that's a total breakdown. And you could tell, because there was all of a sudden, there was that one video clip of couple of suits and a bunch of police officers trying to get through the cyclone fence to just even get over there.
Yeah. Well, even though I write conspiracy theory thrillers, I'm actually, not as much of a, conspiracy theorist. So, that's a bit of, I guess, writer's irony. But at the very least, when I was, when I saw what happened in Butler, it seemed to me like the Secret Service's biggest problem, and this is just coming from a civilian point of view, but throughout history, their biggest problem seems to kind of be more or less a communication breakdown because, going back to Dallas, you had people, warning of potential threats in Dallas and, going all the way to, last year in Butler, there are people who are saying, well, you know, there were people who saw, the shooter try and get up on the roof, and they tried to warn law enforcement, and for whatever reason, it didn't go up the chain in time. So, I don't know. There's the whole thing of, women being in the Secret Service, and I don't really, none of that really matters to me, but more from what I look at, it seems like okay, there was a communications breakdown, but also it seems to me like the excuse that they couldn't have, a couple of shooters on the roof because it's slanted, like, you know, that seems pretty much like, one of the easiest things that, like if James Bond can get up on a roof, then why can't, a Secret Service,
So that breakdown,
sharpshooter?
yeah, and so communication, yeah, there were people. I mean, you could tell the difference. The Secret Service agents who are trained in close protection go through schooling in Greenbelt, Maryland, right? Hogan's
Right.
Alley. They get some level of stress inoculation, right? You could tell the agents who were supportive from different agencies, whether it was inside of Homeland or whatever, even a lot of the cops you could see were acting completely differently than the agents who maybe do some kind, like an agent who does an ICE investigation. I don't think that any ICE agents were there, but there's just a different way that you have been trained, and especially in stress situations. I mean, if the president had been facing the camera, he wouldn't be here, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
the fact that those rounds zipped by when he turned his head were just, God's grace. So what I saw next was agents taking cover with their back to the protective, right? And then that one lady, even though she was short, she came up there and put her body between potential shooters and the president. So she's good in my book. But they had such a lack of people trained in stressful situations that, right, it took a while to get a vehicle up. They had no exit strategy. How do I get out? And in theory, there was an exit strategy in the plan, but for some reason that lead agent didn't want to take it and thought it best to just keep cover on the stage of all places, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on there. But I think at the end of the day, the part of the defect was this lack of communication, being open to getting feedback from the public, number one. And then, like you said, how you can't just put something in place, not go back and check it.
Yeah.
In my day, we didn't have concrete barriers. We used 55-gallon drums. I would look in it, make sure it was clear. Fire department would fill it up with water. We'd put the cap on and put tamper tape over it, and then have yellow tape between the barrels, right, before we had the concrete barriers. And we always went back. Anytime we tamper taped a door into a machine room or into the elevator room, we're always going back and checking to make sure it's not tampered with. And so plans were put in place, and then somebody dropped the ball on going to check and make sure, is this plan still operational? Is it working? Can I move on? Right. And
Yeah. I
almost a tough
mean,
loss.
there's also the perception, and I don't necessarily think that this has anything to do with politics, at least not for me, but there seems to be also a perception that that the president gets a different level of protection versus former presidents or Congress people. And, do you know if that's true?
Yes.
And, okay.
But
So,
oftentimes, especially during a campaign, it's pure staffing. So the A team goes to the sitting president, the B team is with the vice president, right? And and then there's the agents that are also doing the misses, the family, members and kids going to school, like
yeah,
when the Obamas were there, all those kind of things. So that's all happening. And so during the campaign year, especially when we all knew that Trump was going to be the designated candidate, but he hadn't been designated yet. And
right.
so they're still following anybody else, whether it's on the trail, who's on the Republican side. And so they're all getting agents and staff. And every one of those folks is getting at least one or two people that have done it before, right? Have done protection before, not just green agents, right? Because not everybody in the Secret Service has done protection, right? Because there's all that investigative work to do.
Yeah,
Oftentimes you get called to do protection and you stand watch in a hallway. You're not with the person, you're guarding the temporary residence or a place where there's going to be a meeting, other things like that. Yeah, the fact that there was probably more homeland agents there than there were real agents, I think may have been part of the lack of communication exacerbating that gap, right?
yeah,
But why wasn't that ladder to the top of the building welded off, taped up? Why wasn't there just one person walking back and forth with a cop jacket on, a very visible police officer walking back and forth on top of that building? It's that close in, right? The snipers are all looking at 800 yards. That's why he had to
right.
look up over his rifle. So,
Yeah, thank goodness they got the guy, too. And, I will give the shooter team, credit for that. One thing I know, Andrew G. Nelson, I had him on the podcast, last year or shortly after Butler, and he was talking about how when he did, protection in the NYPD for various, delegates and other VIPs, he said that, the communication between between the state and some of the federal agencies wasn't always the best. So again, it seems like communication is always one of the biggest challenges.
yeah, and I'm not sure who. So when I was a communicator at the White House, we provided the Secret Service all the radios, and we would actually all the walkie-talkies, then all the radios for the command center, right, the operations center for that trip or wherever, whether it was Atlanta or overseas, whatever. But we never carried enough radios to give to all the police officers. But the idea would be that in the police command center there would be an agent, right, who could be the
Yeah,
coordinator, right? Not the best situation. It'd be nice to have everybody on the same net listening to the same thing. So how that works today is probably similar, especially when you've got people all over the United States on a campaign. Once again, being if this hadn't have been a campaign year, I think things could have been different too. But shoulda, coulda, woulda.
yeah.
It just didn't happen out that way.
I mean, yeah. I mean, maybe it's just a manpower problem too. That
At some
always,
level, very much, yeah.
yeah. And I don't necessarily, fault, anyone for that, except for, maybe the heads of the, you know, Secret Service. One of the things for sure is they definitely have a real public relations problem across the boards too, because, as far as I can tell, like nobody really seems to be happy with them right now, which is unfortunate. So,
They've yeah, it's interesting. Like on the communication information front, their CIO is a general officer from the Marine Corps because they can't find anybody to come to work that knows how to do the work. They've historically been too proud, too lax. I'm not sure which to make sure that they're budgeted appropriately, and
that kind of seems like the one agency where you would want to have, a lot of, funding if you're going to, certainly if you're going to be protecting the president.
Well, see, I think the focus was so much on protecting the president and all about the agents, and we're going to do everything to protect the president, that the business of running the business was
Right.
was left behind. And from a technology standpoint, other than frequency hopping walkie talkies with true encryption, things like that, that WACA, where I used to be, the White House Communications Agency, would provide things like that. I'm just not sure where they sit. Yeah, hopefully they could once again reduce the mission set so they could focus better on being once again that world class organization that's um, you know ahead of the bad guys instead of reacting to.
Yeah. What do you think of? I know this is kind of switching gears a little bit, but what do you think of, Tulsi Gabbard being selected as DNI? I saw on one of your tweets you seem pretty favorable, towards her as one of your fellow, veterans.
Yeah, well, I'm also the type of person. I did not go to one of the military academies because the tradition, and we've always, this was even in the Secret Service where I had my problem, really sort of tried to grind, was an axe grind for me, was we do it this way because we've always done it this way. And
Yeah.
so putting in people who are going to shake the tree, make people think differently, I think is a good thing. The DNI doesn't doesn't own the agencies. The agency heads do that, right? But the DNI was given the budgetary power, given some level of power. I think it's an interesting, appropriate choice right off the bat for me, just because it's not the old boys network anymore. That I think alternative ways of thinking and solution of problem solving is important.
Yeah.
Becoming static, becoming sort of single-minded is not good for anybody. And so I think these kinds of shakeups across the board are interesting, just to help us be better prepared for the future. Some people see it as, certainly lots of people don't like change. Most people don't like change as much as I do. It's not like that I like change. It's like
Right.
I'm comfortable with it. Change, right? Change is going to happen. Adapt, move on. Let's go. I always hired different people in my positions that I worked so I could have different mindsets, different ways of thinking, different points of view. And, that's what you do when you're building a team. You don't want everybody on a team think like yourself, right? And so that group think that we think this way because Brennan thought this way, or we think this way because of XYZ. It's like,
Yeah, that's very much a problem. At least like when I was working even in politics for a brief period of time, groupthink was, a big problem. And, it's worse there because of party affiliation and alliances and all of that, gobbledygook.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just recently there was an interesting article, a piece on there's some thought about keeping some of the NSC staffers and the National Security Council staffers, and it's like, they're still going to be tied. They just spend
Yeah.
all this time with Obama and Biden. They're gonna be. I would change them out. Makes me stutter to think about it, but I'd be changing people out for fresh thought, new ways of looking at the China problem, or oil in Kyrgyzstan, whatever.
Yeah, well, that we talk at the southern border a lot when it comes to national security, and that certainly is important. But we also have other threats, too. Most people forget about. Obviously, you haven't because you just wrote a book, Caribbean being harvest about, the Cuba, threat, and the fact that Florida, where I'm at, is, a major port for a lot of these. things coming in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
And yeah,
it would be nice if we, over the 10, $15 billion we've spent, it would be nice to actually notch some wins in the drug war. We take a lot of drugs out of the system. I mean, the Coast Guard and the Navy take millions of dollars of drugs every time they sail into the Caribbean out of the system, but winning is not something I'd label. I wouldn't label us as winning the drug war at this point.
yeah, no, I certainly don't think we are there either. Do you think Tom Holman is going to actually do anything to help like put a dent in the drug war, or does he seem like what's your
Well, there'll be some knock-on effect. Unfortunately, a lot of illegals get abused on both sides of the
yeah,
border, right? And hey, we're getting you across, so now you're in our clutches for possibly forever, right?
yeah.
Those kind of things. So there'll be some knock-on effect. I don't think, without building a Poland-like border, Poland against Belarus, then we're going to continue to have the problems we have, whether we have a big wall or not, because our demand for drugs is so high. And the this fentanyl thing is like is way out of hand. We see it here. Whole families being involved in Colorado. It's so bad that you can get a fentanyl test kit. The government, the state government will give you a fentanyl test kit so you can test your illegal drugs you're taking to make sure you don't die from fentanyl overdose. So,
Wow.
yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm sure I shared with you that I'm originally from Colorado, and I'm not, just from what I've kind of gathered, I'm not so sure that, marijuana legalization necessarily solved, the problem of, people getting their hands on illicit drugs or skunk weed or anything like that, as they call it. You would know a lot more about that than I would, given your
no,
you
it's
know
yeah, you go down to Broadway, you drive down Broadway and you get a secondhand high. Funny story, when they legalized marijuana, all these dispensaries had to start paying their taxes to the state, and they're bringing all this THC laced money in, and the people counting the money are getting high. And so the city of Denver had to put out a contract for somebody to actually clean the money, literally clean it before they counted it, because it was so skunked up, the money.
literal money laundering in that case.
Yeah, legal money laundering in that case. I ended up talking with the comptroller of Denver, and he's like, we haven't taken a paper currency payment in years. We went digital, right? We went online and things like that. And so they had to create a whole environment so they could take all this dispensary tax money and ingest it into the system.
How
I'm not sure that it's gotten back out to schools or where it's gone, but
Yeah,
there for a while, there were a lot of happy looking, state employees counting money.
I'm sure. Well, that they wanted to legalize, marijuana here in Florida, and I voted no, not necessarily because I'm against the concept of. I'm all for decriminalization, but I definitely think that a lot of people don't necessarily read bills anymore about how things get legalized, and giving a monopoly to one marijuana dispensary like they did in Colorado doesn't necessarily seem to be the smartest move in my
And
book.
it hasn't really stopped the cartels, has it? Because they just grow their black market stuff and sell it a bit cheaper. They've got
Yeah,
competition. And so they sell it cheaper, and they do things to destroy the ecosystem while they're growing it, right? Because they're using chemicals and killing fish downstream, and yeah, it's nasty stuff.
yeah, yeah, the cartels are still making money off of it, and honestly, I'm not sure if there's any politician, as much as I like Trump, I'm not sure that it's only going to be him that's going to be able to put a dent in the drug war. That's another thing that really frustrates me is I've talked to other people. It really does frustrate me that the drug war is seen now as like a partisan issue for the two parties when really that and border security really should kind of be a bipartisan thing in my book. But
Yeah.
I guess that's why I'm not a politician.
Yeah. And people talk about the plight of the people who are trying to leave El Salvador into gangs or other places. And I get it. We're a country built out of people who have emigrated. But from my standpoint, if people follow the rules and go through immigration the way it's set up, it's not easy. It's not quick. But if you're doing it the appropriate legal way, I'm all for, having, folks enter this country and do it appropriately.
Yeah.
Because like I say, as you well know, those people that come across illegal are getting abused on both sides of the border. So hopefully we can stem some of that and get control, get a better level of control of what goes on than we currently have. Especially if we could focus on the real criminals at that point, that would be a whole lot better.
Yeah, definitely for sure. Well, Steve, I really appreciate your time. Before we head out again, you've got Caribbean Harvest that's coming out on the 14th. So by the time people are listening to this, that should be out. That's going to be in hardcover and paperback.
I'll have it in the ebook and paperback, and then for select folks who want a signed copy, I'll have a hardcover version.
That's cool. I actually I know James Dawson. He and I are in kind of like a writing collaborators group, and he showed me a picture of one of the books that you gave him in like a covered crime scene
Evidence bag.
Yeah, evidence bag. I thought that was cool. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's just a lot. One of those fun things you can do as an author to differentiate a little bit, but just have fun.
Yeah. Well, even I was at a family reunion, at the end of last year, and I bought a couple of copies of my books to give out to family members and had them autographed and personalized stuff.
Nice.
Just little things like that are always fun to do as an author.
Exactly.
But anyway, Steve, I want to thank you for coming on. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yes, I'm at Steven, Steven Stratton, Stratton, USA.com. StevenStrattonUSA.com is my website. You'll get into my X, my Instagram, my Facebook are all there. I've got blog posts, videos, pictures, trailers, and of course, when episode is live, we'll post it on the website and push it out to everybody. Once again, Sam, thank you so much for having me again to start a new year. I really appreciate you, brother.
I appreciate you too, and I really appreciate you and everyone who has helped me on my writer's journey. You and Eric Bishop I've known for a long time, actually. So always appreciate talking to you, and folks, I always appreciate you listening, and I will see you guys on the Wednesday show. Until then, take care and God bless.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.